Welcome to the Academic Writing Primer. The purpose of this primer is to provide you with the practical and conceptual tools you need to develop your academic writing skills, and to show you how academic writing differs from other styles of writing. The primer is divided into two sections, lower order concerns and higher order concerns. In academic writing, not every element has equal priority. The most important parts of your writing are called higher order concerns, or HOCs. The broad elements such as thesis, organization, development, and the documentation of your sources. After you have addressed these important elements, you can turn your attention to the lower order concerns, or LOCs, which are grammar, usage, and mechanics. You may be tempted to ignore LOCs, not realizing how they affect HOCs. Remember, others may not view you as a credible student or leader if your writing is riddled with punctuation and spelling errors. And as you become a more experienced writer, it will be important for you to take the time to address both orders of concern. The 8 parts of speech include nouns, pronouns, adjectives, prepositions, interjections, conjunctions, adverbs, and verbs. Nouns. Nouns are names of a person, place, thing, or idea. We have subjects and objects, depending on where they appear in the sentence. We have collective nouns, words like family, team, or committee. And collective nouns can be used in the singular or plural. We'll talk more about that a little later. And then we have count nouns, words like table or window. And we should use how many and fewer to describe count nouns. Non-count nouns are words like spaghetti or milk, and we should use how much or less to describe non-count nouns. So in academic writing, be sure to describe count and non-count nouns correctly. Pronouns. Pronouns take the place of nouns. We have relative pronouns and reflexive pronouns, which we'll talk about on future slides. But this chart, I think, is really helpful. So you'll notice in the first column, we have first, second, and third person. The next column are singular pronouns like I, you, he, she, and it. And in the plural column, we have we, you, they. In academic writing, we should use third-person pronouns. An exception would be when you're providing a personal response, then you can use first-person pronouns. But when you're reviewing literature in an academic paper, you will want to stay in third person. So in an academic paper, I shouldn't see any pronouns like I, my, mine, we, us, or you, or your. So that's important to remember, to stay in third person in academic writing. Adjectives. Adjectives describe nouns. They're called comparatives when we're comparing two nouns, and they usually end in ER, such as the word larger. We have superlatives when we're comparing 3 or more nouns, and they end in EST, such as the word largest. Nouns can also function as adjectives, like the red balloon. Red is a noun, but in this case it functions as an adjective. In academic writing, use fewer adjectives to avoid evaluation because we want to stay objective in academic writing. Prepositions. Prepositions describe location or place. We have about 8 or 9 prepositions in our language that do most of the work. There are words like in, on, at, above, around, beyond. They're important words that can change the whole meaning of a sentence. For example, think about these sentences. God did it to me. God did it for me. Freedom of religion. Freedom from religion. Prepositional phrases are the preposition followed by the noun clause. And it's important that you remember what a prepositional phrase is when we get to subject-verb agreement. So let's look at this sentence. The dog ran around the house. Around is the preposition and the noun clause is the house. In academic writing, do not end a sentence with a preposition. Now that word that goes in the blank there where I have around, if it can fit in that blank and make sense, it's probably a preposition. Not always. Now there are some exceptions, but the dog ran around the house. The dog ran to the house. The dog ran in the house. Those are prepositions. And the reason we have exceptions to things in our language, which can be confusing, especially when you're learning English as a second language, is that we've absorbed a lot of words from other languages in English. So sometimes pronunciation rules, for example, don't apply. So in academic writing, do not end a sentence with a preposition. Now when you read a magazine or a newspaper article or a web story or something like that, you will see lots of examples of ending in a preposition. But in academic writing, we try to avoid that. Interjections. These are words that express emotions. They're usually followed by an exclamation mark indicating strong emotion or followed by a comma when the feeling's not as strong. In academic writing, do not use interjections. They're just too informal. Conjunctions. Conjunctions connect parts of a sentence. An easy way to remember the coordinating conjunctions are to remember the acronym FANBOYS: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. In academic writing, we do not begin a sentence with a coordinating conjunction. Again, if you read a magazine article or any other style of writing, a story, a novel, whatever, you will usually see sentences that begin with a coordinating conjunction. But in academic writing, we should not. And they're often separated by a comma when connecting two independent clauses. And also the comma is back in before and. Maybe some of you learned that you didn't need that comma there, but we're going to put it back in. And here's an example of why. Look at that first sentence. Jack, comma, Jill and Spot inherit $1 million. So Jack inherits $500,000. Jill and Spot inherit $250,000 each. In the next example, Jack, comma, Jill, comma, and Spot inherit $1 million. They split that $1 million equally in 3 ways. So in academic writing, do not begin a sentence with a coordinating conjunction. Adverbs. Adverbs describe how an action occurred. Adverbs usually end in ly, although there are a few exceptions, such as fast, late, and hard. Those are adverbs, but they do not end in ly. For example, we don't write, he ran fastly, or she arrived lately, or she hit the ball hardly. Often, adverbs are unnecessary. Consider this sentence when we use a strong enough verb. The radio blared loudly. We really don't need that adverb to understand that sentence. So in academic writing, choose strong verbs and eliminate most adverbs. The last part of speech is verbs. Verbs describe action. And we have 3 basic tenses in the English language, which are portrayed in a chart on page 4, showing the varying forms. The thing to remember about verbs in academic writing is to be consistent when you're using past tense. Be consistent in your paragraphs. Also, when you review literature, that verb that follows the author and the year of publication, for example, that verb needs to be in the past tense. The sentence here is Bostrom 2016 defined servant leadership. So defined needs to be past tense. In academic writing, use past tense to review literature, to discuss past events, and to describe results. You would use present tense to draw conclusions. Articles are another important word class in English. We have the indefinite articles a and an, and the definite article the. Use a before a consonant sound. Use an before a vowel sound. Remember that the U can have a consonant or vowel sound, such as a university, an umbrella. And remember, H is sometimes not pronounced, so we would write a horse or an hour. Use the when it's clear which thing or person is referred to. Use the when there is only one of something, and use the when the name of a country or state includes the word of. Relative pronouns. Often students make mistakes with relative pronouns, so basically what you need to remember is that when you're referring to a human, a person, then you would use the relative pronoun who. When you're referring to inanimate objects, you can use which or that. So let's try these 3 sentences together and choose the correct relative pronoun. Please give your paper to the professor. Who, which, or that teaches on Monday. The journal article, Who, Which, or That, the author submitted in 2006, was not published until 2008. The book, Who, Which, or That arrived today is not the one I ordered. Let's look at the first sentence together. Please give your paper to the professor. So you're referring to a professor, which is a human being or a person, and so you would use the relative pronoun who. Number 2, the journal article which the author submitted in 2006 was not published until 2008. I chose which because of the commas. And if you've ever noticed in Word, if you have the grammar check feature on, you'll notice that sometimes which will have a green squiggle underneath it. Try inserting a comma before which and watch that squiggle go away. So in this case, I do have a comma after article and after 2006, so the correct relative pronoun is which. Number 3, the book that arrived today is not the one I ordered. By the way, whenever possible, eliminate the relative pronoun that. If the sentence will still make sense, you can just leave the word that out. Now let's talk about subject-verb agreement. We're going to go through these 8 sentences together, and we're going to underline the subject and circle the pronoun or the verb that agrees with the subject. And rather than go through all of those bullet points in your primer first, those will emerge as we work through these sentences together. But students often make mistakes by misidentifying the subject with which the pronoun or the verb needs to agree. So we'll go through those together. The first thing to remember is that the subject will never be in a prepositional phrase. In sentence 1, the prepositional phrase is from employees. So you know that the subject is not employees, the subject is leader. So you'd underline leader. Leader is singular, so you need to use the singular pronouns, his or her. I have a suggestion. If you're going to be using a word like leader often in a paper, you might want to consider using the plural form, because that way you wouldn't have to type his or her several times. You could use the plural pronoun there instead. Number 2, each of the students understands or understand the rules. Of the students is a prepositional phrase, so you need to underline each, not students. Each understands the rules. Number 3, there was or were many students in the class. In the class is a prepositional phrase, so you know that that class is not the subject. Underline students. Students were. The word there is a filler word, and so that will never be the subject. Number 4, the members of the academic team has or have been chosen. Of the academic team is a prepositional phrase, so you know that team is not the subject. Underline members. Members have been chosen. Number 5, neither Sandy nor Jennifer is or are a senior. When you have 2 subjects like this sentence does, you go with the subject that's closest to the verb. So underline Jennifer and circle is. Now, if that sentence were Sandy and Jennifer are seniors, you'd have to change a senior to seniors plural. Number 6, the jury was or were taking their seats. I mentioned that sometimes collective nouns are used in singular and sometimes they're used as plural. In this case, jury is plural, and I know that because it says taking their seats. So underline jury and circle were. Number 7, is or are there any questions? Underline questions and circle are. Number 8. Number 8 is an example of subjunctive mood, and so you can read in the primer more about that if you want to. But in this case, we would underline she, and then because it's not a fact, we circle take, corrective action immediately. In academic writing, use the active voice as much as possible. Active voice is used to communicate good or neutral news, and it's where the subject is the doer of the act. Several writers worked on the research project. Passive voice is used to communicate bad news, and it's where the subject is acted upon. That same sentence written in passive voice is the research project was worked on by several writers. Circle that word by. That's a little clue that it's probably written in passive voice. Let's try a few examples. Change these passive sentences to active. The topic was researched by Knight, 2004. Several examples were provided by Knight and DeWitt, 1995. To rewrite them in active voice, we would write Knight, 2004, researched the topic. Number 2, Knight and DeWitt, 1995, provided several examples. You can also bring sentences to life by changing too many TION nouns to verbs. So listen to how clunky this sentence is. The department leader's conviction is that information provided to employees can lead to a reduction in the duplication of questions. This sounds much better. The department leader is convinced that providing more information to employees can reduce the number of duplicated questions. Your primer also includes some information about how to use inclusive language. Let's rework this sentence using inclusive language. The easier it is for a man to see the results of an innovation, the more likely they are to adopt it. Rogers, 2003, Rogers and Shoemaker, 1971. Notice that there are two sources used to write this sentence. To rework this sentence using inclusive language, we could write, the easier it is for people to see the results of an innovation, the more likely they are to adopt it. People is plural, so you need to make sure that you have subject-verb agreement and that it agrees in number with the pronoun they. Meaningless words. I often see these phrases in academic writing, and we can often get rid of a lot of clutter and a lot of meaningless words by restating these phrases in just one word. In order to could just be written to. As a result of, therefore. Joined together, that's redundant, isn't it? So you could just write joined. In between, as between. In addition to, as additionally. Due to the fact that, as because. Visible to the eye, just visible. Absolutely essential, again that's redundant, and you could just write essential. Generally speaking, just generally, and all things considered, overall. Parallelism is another important concept in academic writing. So you want to make sure that when you have a list of something in a sentence that they are parallel in structure. So we're going to look at these three sentences and make them parallel. Number 1, her main interests are studying the Bible and to work in her garden. Studying and working need to be parallel in structure. Number 2, he was both skilled and with good preparation. Skilled and prepared need to be parallel in structure. The process involves researching, writing, and editing the paper. Those three, researching, writing, and editing, need to be parallel in structure. Not only is parallelism important in academic papers, but think about it even in your PowerPoint presentations, and make your slides parallel as well. So let's look at this example. The title of the slide is Parts of a Bug. Bugs have wings, legs are on bugs, antenna. To make this slide parallel in structure, you could simply put wings, legs, antenna. Consider this presentation slide and how you would make this one parallel in structure. One example, you could just change the first word to be parallel. Determine, strive, plan, capitalize, and increase. Sentence structure. I've included some criteria in your primer about what makes a complete sentence. So based on that criteria, let's write yes or no on the line before each one. Number 1, correctly citing her sources. Number 2, Sarah was citing her sources correctly. Number 3, write his paper last night. Number 4, I read it. Number 5, the student could not remember which day the paper was due on. Number 6, and I read a few more pages before it was time to leave for work. Number 7, is there any questions? Number 8, technology may be the single greatest force for change in higher education, making its most dramatic impact in distributed learning and technologies, reshaping teaching and pedagogy, transforming the learning experience, and driving institutional change. How did you do? Number 1, that is not a correct sentence. There's no subject. Number 2, Sarah was citing her sources correctly. Yes, that is a complete sentence. Number 3, write his paper last night? No. Number 4, I read it. And that's not a complete sentence in academic writing because it's not doesn't begin with a capital letter, but also it uses an exclamation point, and we don't use those in academic writing. Number 5, the student could not remember which day the paper was due on. No, according to the criteria, this is not a complete sentence because it ends in a preposition. Number 6, and I read a few more pages before it was time to leave for work. No, because it begins with a coordinating conjunction. Remember fanboys? Number 7, is there any questions? No, it's lacking in subject-verb agreement. It should be, are there any questions? And number 8 is what we call a run-on sentence. That really could be turned into at least 2 separate sentences so that it wasn't so long. Ellipsis. The ellipsis is 3 spaced points within a sentence, and we use those in academic writing to indicate omitted material from the original source. We use 4 points to indicate any omission between 2 sentences. The first point indicates the period at the end of the first sentence quoted, and the 3 spaced ellipsis points follow. Abbreviations. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the punctuation examples that I've provided in the primer. I'm just going to camp out on a few here. E.g. is Latin for example. So if you're going to use that abbreviation, the correct punctuation is E period G period comma, and then provide another example. I.e. is Latin for that is, or in other words. So the correct punctuation is I period E period comma, and then restate the information that I just read. Better yet, I would spell out for example, or in other words, or that is, rather than using the abbreviations. It's not wrong to use the abbreviations, so if you do use them, just use them correctly. The comma. If only the month and the year are provided, you do not separate with a comma. He graduated in May 2006. However, if the month, day, and year are used, then you would separate the date and year with commas. He graduated on May 21st, 2006, and his entire family attended the ceremony. Use the comma before coordinating conjunctions that join two main clauses. She thought there would be enough time to finish the project, comma, but she was interrupted too many times. Semicolon. You can use a semicolon to connect two independent clauses when closely related in idea. So the part that comes before the semicolon as well as the part that comes after, those both need to be independent clauses, or in other words, they could be a full sentence on their own. So use them when you feel like you want to start a sentence with a coordinating conjunction, one of the fanboys, or with the word it, because it is ambiguous, consider using a semicolon. Use a semicolon to separate sentence elements equal in rank when they contain commas. Between main clauses connected by certain conjunctive adverbs. Conjunctive adverbs are words like however, therefore, then, similarly, and likewise. Use the semicolon to separate three or more elements that have internal commas. Hyphens. The trend in English is to use fewer hyphens, but we would hyphenate 2- or 3-part adjectives. So how would you hyphenate these phrases? Anxiety arousing, that's a 2-part adjective, so that would be hyphenated. Trial by trial, 3-part adjective. 10th grade students, and follow-up meeting. Follow-up is an adjective, a 2-part adjective describing what kind of meeting it is. However, if you were to follow up with someone after the meeting, you would not hyphenate it. When you're using the apostrophe in academic writing, do not use the apostrophe for nouns in the plural form and avoid contractions. For example, couldn't, you should write out could not. There's a simple 3-step system that you can use to form possessives. Step 1 is to write the base word. Step 2, add the apostrophe. And step 3, add s if the word does not already end in s or z. Let's say our base word is professor. So step 1 is write professor. Step 2, add the apostrophe. And step 3, add s if the word does not already end in s or z. However, let's say that our base word was professors. Step 2, add the apostrophe. And step 3, notice you don't add another s because the word ends in s already. There are several things you should pay attention to about using numbers correctly according to APA, but let me just camp out on a few here. Use figures to express all numbers 10 and above. Use figures to express time, dates, ages, scores, and points on a scale, exact sums of money. Use words to express numbers 1 through 9, and approximation of days and months. This has been a presentation on the lower order concerns, or LOCs, of academic writing. What makes academic writing different from other styles of writing? Use third person. Use past or present perfect tense to review literature. Use fewer adjectives and adverbs. Make sure the verb agrees with the subject. Avoid ending sentences with prepositions or beginning sentences with coordinating conjunctions or fanboys. Avoid using interjections and contractions. Use active voice and inclusive language. Be concise. Use parallel structure to join words in a list. Write complete sentences. Use the ellipsis only to denote omitted content, and use figures accurately. Remember to address the LOCs in your academic writing and resist the temptation to ignore them. You want others to view you as a credible student or leader, and it makes it more difficult if your writing is riddled with punctuation and spelling errors.